Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Cannabis is Personal. Learn how your genetics play a big role. Presented by Len May, CEO, Endocanna Health. My name is Xavier Gutierrez, and I will be your moderator for today's event. We are delighted to bring you this educational web seminar presented by LabRoots. LabRoots is the leading scientific social networking website and producer of educational virtual events and webinars. Now, before we begin, I would like to remind everyone that this event is interactive. We encourage you to participate by submitting as many questions as you want during the presentation. Simply click on the Ask a Question box located on the far left of your screen and type your questions into the drop-down box. Our speaker will respond to your questions via email following the presentation. If you have trouble seeing or hearing the presentation, please click on the Ask a Question box to let us know that you're experiencing a problem. This presentation is educational and thus offers continuing education credits. Please click on the Continuing Education Credits tab located in the top right corner of the presentation window and follow the process to obtain your credits. Now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Len May. I will now turn the presentation over to him.
Well, thank you, Xavier, and welcome everyone. I really appreciate the opportunity. This is, my passion. I love to talk about the endocannabinoid system, and I love to talk about the personal experience that people have with cannabis. So just to kind of give you a little bit of a background overview, Xavier already gave an introduction, but I am the CEO and co-founder of Endocanna Health. I have some certifications, lifelong board member of the California Cannabis Association, and I was a past president of the Cannabis Action Network. But my passion has always been the therapeutic properties of this amazing plant. So in starting my presentation, I always like to kind of give you, the audience, a background into what my desktop looks like. So this is a really, I just captured a screenshot of what my desktop looks like. And as you guys can see, there are a lot of tabs open. And the reason why I do this is to give everybody an overview of sort of a glimpse into what happens in my brain. So I was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder when I was a kid, and in my teens, I was put on all kinds of prescription medication. But the kind of ADD that I have is sort of the ADD that looks like my desktop. There's a lot of different tabs that constantly open up in my brain, and it's very difficult for me to focus on one single thing. So as a kid growing up, I would have all these thoughts, and they would be sort of like the tabs that open up in my computer. But once I was put on prescription medication, some of it worked, all of it made me feel awful. And I was lucky enough that I was able to find cannabis, and it was an experience in my late teens that I had, where that experience really led to me discovering that this is a medicine that works for me. So when I first accidentally consumed cannabis without knowing what it was, the world sort of slowed down. So all these tabs still kind of were going through, but I could actually sit down and focus. So that way, it allowed me to be able to sit in class, pay attention, and focus on certain tasks. So this became my go-to medicine, and I was able to get off all the prescription medication that I was on. And my parents weren't really happy with that experience, and they asked me to leave. So I did, and started pursuing, trying to figure out a way how I can make a difference. How can I make a difference and have other people really recognize that this plant works for them as well as it did for me? So I was at a music event, and I spotted some people that were registering people to vote. And they said, Cannabis Action Network, they had a little banner. And walked up to them and said, what are you guys doing? They said, registering people to vote. We're trying to make a difference in the cannabis industry. And so, long story short, I became the president of the Cannabis Action Network. And I held a rally at Independence Hall in Philadelphia, which I'm originally from Philadelphia. And this is on federal property where the Declaration of Independence is, the Constitution, all written on hemp paper, by the way. And I had a keynote speaker. My keynote speaker was this lady named Elvie Masika. And Elvie's one of the first people to get federally prescribed cannabis under the NIDA program. And she was able to consume cannabis in front of federal rangers on federal property with her can or metal kind of jar of pre-rolled medical or medicinal cannabis joints. And she was able to light that up in front of those rangers, and it was legal. And this is going back to 1993, so I'm slightly aging myself. But the experience I had from a legal standpoint, this shed a light on what the future will look like. And I thought it was going to be something that's going to happen quickly, but it took, over 20 years for that to happen in Pennsylvania, for instance. But the experience I really want to talk about is what happened the next day. So everybody from the rally stayed in my house, and we got woken up to a very loud noise. And Elvie happened to walk into a sculpture I had in my house and broke it. And the reason why she did that is because she couldn't see it. So Elvie was getting medicinal cannabis prescribed under the federal program for her degenerative glaucoma. So she was legally blind. But I witnessed an incredible act that occurred, and that was my aha moment. When I witnessed Elvie medicate with cannabis, and she was able to see. Now, granted, she still wore glasses, and they're kind of thick, but she was able to see. So that was my second moment where I came to a realization that cannabis didn't just work for me personally, but also work for other people. So this has to be a therapeutic product that can make a difference in many people's lives. So I began my journey by pursuing any means and ways that I can get cannabis and actually suggest that and provide that to people that have all kinds of different conditions. And, my journey led me to move into California, to the Los Angeles area. I got involved in the dispensary space for a while, and got involved in cultivation, and I was trying to figure out a way on how to deliver this product to so many different people, and I started getting some interesting feedback. So we would find a strain, or what we like to call more of a chemovar cultivar, because strain does refer as a reference to a virus, but a chemovar, which is a profile of cannabis, and we would recommend or suggest or provide that and facilitate that to a person that had a specific condition, let's say Parkinson's, for an example. And we would find that profile that worked for that person, and we send them to a dispensary and say, okay, now go and get this product. Maybe it was Blue Dream, just as an example. And sometimes they would call me up and say, well, it's not working for me. I could not understand why. Why wasn't it working for them when I know that it worked there? So there was several possible reasons. Number one, the cultivator may have not known exactly what the product was. The dispensary may have mislabeled it, or there could have been some other kind of reasons we weren't sure. So I began sort of, somebody that has ADD can't focus, or you can hyper focus. So when something really stimulates you in a certain way, where you have a lot of dopamine released, you hyper focus on this. So I became obsessed. My obsession was to try to find the answer to this. So I came across a video by a gentleman named Kevin Kernan, who first genetically sequenced cannabis, and reached out to Kevin and began a relationship with Kevin's company called Medicinal Genomics, where I was able to go around the country and extract DNA from different plants, from different cannabis plants, purify that DNA, and then send it over to a sequencer in Boston where we can start getting a cannabinoid library. So we can start understanding the different effects of the different cannabinoids and terpenes that are in the plant and understand what the makeup of them are. The second part of that was there was a company that their parent company was called Cortron Life Sciences, where they did human genetic sequencing. And in doing that, I started looking at ways, how do human genetic markers interact with our endocannabinoid system? And that sort of began my journey in trying to figure out why cannabis is personal. So before I go into that, I want to go into the endocannabinoid system a little bit and really explain how the system works based on my understanding of the system. So the endocannabinoid system is our primary regulatory system within our bodies. Not only does it regulate, our immune, digestive system, it regulates bone growth, it regulates organs, reproductive organs, etc. But we have these endogenous endocannabinoids that actually our body produces. So we all have cannabis inside of us in some way or another. So in addition to creating these endogenous endocannabinoids that are really called ligands in a way, they are there are also receptors that we're born with. There are receptors within our body that are activated by these ligands as well. And there's also enzymes that control the way that those ligands are expressed. And I'll go into that in a little more detail, but I'd like to give an example of how that would work. So what happens is when our body is in homeostasis, which is the way it normally functions, we have the amount of endogenous endocannabinoids that are being produced at the basal level that is right for us as an individual. However, when we begin to have a deficiency in our naturally producing endocannabinoids, the endogenous ones, then our body reacts in a certain way. So let's say that we have a deficiency in one of our endogenous endocannabinoids, and there's two that I really want to focus on. One of them is called anandamide. The other one is called 2-AG. And they're also ligands that activate those receptors and bind to those receptors. So if there is a deficiency in our endogenous endocannabinoids, our body responds to that. So it can respond to that in several different ways. Number one, it can be a stress response. So depending on what type of enzyme deficiency you have in your body, and there's two different pathways on your CB1 and CB2 receptors, and think about CB1 receptors pathways that have an association with anandamide. Anandamide is also referred to as a bliss hormone, and it has a lot to do with the way their body responds to stress. So anxiety, depression, all these different things. And the 2-AG, that is more associated with the CB2 receptor pathway, and that has a lot to do with an immune response. So just to give you sort of an example of how that would work, well, let's say that you have a deficiency in the way that your natural anandamide is produced, or your basal levels are low, and there's a stressful event. I don't know, somebody cuts you off in traffic, there's an illness, something happens in the moment where you have a stressful event. And if that happens, your body responds to that. And because you have a deficiency there, there's also cortisol that's released into your bloodstream. That cortisol exacerbates a feeling of anxiety or stress, or even maybe paranoia of some sorts. But there is a response. Now, your second receptor area, it's the CB2 receptor area, which is associated with your immune system as well. That can also produce a response in addition to the stress response, which is more mental. The physical response is your immune response. So you may have an overstimulation of your immune system, which can attack that area and create inflammation. That inflammation can send a signal of pain and discomfort back to your receptor site, through your central nervous system. So you have neurotransmitters, and that information goes up your neurotransmitter, and that produces a feeling of pain or discomfort, where your body needs to address that pain, discomfort, and address that overactive immune response. So your endocannabinoid system is out of whack. So what? And there's a couple of different things that happen, and I'll go into a little bit deeper on the enzyme or the cellular level as well. But what happens is we have a deficiency. So if that's the case, we were lucky enough that we found one single plant so far in nature that possesses cannabinoids and terpenes, which I will also go into, that mimic the way our own endogenous endocannabinoids work. So to find the right ratio for an individual to be able to mimic and activate those receptors that are already in our bodies, that can fill those gaps that we have naturally and allow us to regain homeostasis, which is balance. So what happens is that inflammation begins to reduce. Once that inflammation begins to reduce, that signal of pain or discomfort goes away, and it subsides, and then you have regained homeostasis again. So how does that happen, and what happens in our bodies? Well, what happens in our bodies and how that really works is a matter of different cannabinoids. And I want to talk about a few specific ones that everybody probably knows. But the two most common ones are THC and CBD. So just to preface, the way when you get the cannabinoids that are in their natural raw state, and you get them from the plant and you consume them, the psychotropic effect or the conversion doesn't happen until you heat that molecule. When you heat that molecule, the THC and CBD originally in their plant form, they have an acid molecule that's attached. When you heat that, the process is called decarboxylation. The acid molecule is released, and there's a conversion as in form of THC to delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, which does give you that psychogenic, psychotropic effect. So the two most common cannabinoids are THC and CBD, as I mentioned before. Now, I want to touch on CBD for a minute because CBD is cannabidiol. And what happens is, since it's very prevalent in the market, and my talk isn't about legalities per se, but because of the Farm Bill, it's becoming even more prevalent. It's easily accessible, and it's an amazing cannabinoid. It has a lot of tremendously therapeutic benefits, antibacterial, neuroprotective, and neuroprotective is extremely important, especially for athletes and our veterans and people that have brain injuries, anti-inflammation, which is huge. And as I mentioned before, on the CB2 pathways, reduction of inflammation. There's disease states like cancer, for instance, that have inflammation that's associated with that. And it works really well to address some of those inflammatory conditions, suppressing muscle spasms. All that is amazing and incredible. However, I absolutely want to point out a couple of things about CBD. Now, CBD and cannabinoids in general are modulators. So what I mean by that is there is a postsynaptic and presynaptic modulation that occurs. And cannabinoids are really interesting because they get signals from our bodies. Those signals then go back to a postsynaptic response, like in the form of the anandamide or 2-AG, which is a cannabinoid that's really similar to how THC can actually exacerbate or work with that with that receptor site, or on that ligand, I should say. But what happens is that information comes back postsynaptically and then goes upstream to communicate to our bodies, to our central nervous system, what needs to happen, how to regulate, what we need more or less of. So what happens in the form of CBD is CBD may act as an uptake inhibitor because of its modulating effect. So what I mean by that is, and where I want to point out just kind of an area to be aware of, when somebody's consuming a prescription medication, let's say that's I know a lot of people are consuming CBD for anxiety. So if you are on a medication like an SSRI, anti-anxiety, or antidepressant, and you consume your CBD together with your medication, it may actually inhibit the uptake, the efficacy, or reduce the uptake of your prescription medication. So being aware of that will really be helpful in speaking to your healthcare professional of how do I consume CBD with with my prescription medication. It's really, really key that you have that conversation. It's one thing to consume an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety medication, but you can be consuming something that's more necessary for your life, which is like a blood thinner medication, so like a warfarin, for instance. So that can also affect the efficacy of your blood thinner medication. So just be aware of that, and then be aware of when you're consuming your medication or your cannabinoid medication, make sure that it's tested, make sure that it's free of pesticides, heavy metals, etc. The other thing that I want to mention on CBD, as I dive deeper into the other cannabinoids, is, and this is having to do with most cannabinoids anyway, your metabolic function is really, really important in the way you consume different cannabinoids. And on the CBD front, a lot of us make expensive urine in a way. So based on our fast ability to metabolize, we're an ultra fast metabolizer, maybe we need more cannabinoids. But if we're a slow metabolizer, we need less. So being able to understand that will help you with the dosing process. So that's the thing that I want to mention about CBD. But it is an incredible cannabinoid with many, many, many very, very therapeutic qualities. So I want to talk about some other cannabinoids as well. So THC, that most people already know, and it is great for appetite. And the reason why it works for appetite, it stimulates an area of the brain in our amygdala that is a pleasure principle. And what's a better way to get pleasure than having like fatty, sugary, and salty foods? And that's kind of what happens. So when you think about somebody consuming THC at some point and they're getting, what people refer to as the munchies, think about, I don't think too many people are getting munchies for kale per se. So that's where the area is stimulated, and it has that kind of effect. And I already mentioned the acid molecule. So when you see an A next to it, it's not psychotropic, psychoactive in a way until the decarboxylation happens, which is that heating process. I mentioned CBD. There are over 80 total cannabinoids. And you know what? There's even more. I was in the lab recently, and we were looking at mass spectrometer readings, and the mass spectrometer reading looks at the weights of the different cannabinoids that we can actually say, okay, based on this information, we know this is CBD. But there are some that were being picked up that we couldn't even identify. So we're not sure what those cannabinoids are, but there are even more that I'm sure are going to be identified in the near future. So CBDV, there's a lot of studies that are going on with CBDV right now, and autism as an anticonvulsive, as a regulator of glucose. There's also CBG, which is sort of, the father of a lot of the different cannabinoids. It's really good for muscle tension. And CBC, which is antimicrobial. And then you have CBN. And CBN is really interesting because CBN is really a conversion cannabinoid. And what I mean by that is people say this to me sometimes. They said, hey, I found a bag of cannabis somewhere in my car. I had it forever in here. And when I consumed that, man, it was couch-like. Well, it could be that your cannabis was laying in direct sunlight for a while. When it happens, sometimes THC deteriorates and it converts. So I use a banana as an example. When it's green and it hasn't really formed, it doesn't have all its nutrients. When it becomes yellow, it's a perfect time to consume, and that's your cannabis that's cured properly, that has a full expression of the cannabinoids and terpene profile. And when it starts going brown, it starts losing some of those, therapeutic vitamins. And that's what happens in THC deterioration, and that converts to CBN, which can be a sedative as well. So now that I mentioned cannabinoids, I want to talk about terpenes. Now, terpenes are the oils, the essential oils that are glandular secretions of the cannabis plant. They're very, very important because they work synergistically with the cannabinoids to produce a certain effect. Now, when we talk about indicas and sativas, which, in my opinion, are really non-existent anymore because those they have the endogenous or indigenous sativa and indica chemovars. They've been bred out for the most part. So what you have is you have a terpene profile that helps to make a determination how closely it relates to an indica or sativa. So the chemovars are strains that originally belonged to a harsher climates in Southeast Asia. They express a much more diesely pungent smell, and that was prevalent with Mercy as the dominant terpene profile. And the ones that grew more in a tropical climate in the Caribbean, in some regions of Africa, like Durban Poison, Maui Wowie, they have a little bit of a more floral kind of scent, and that's associated more with limonene, and that is more dominant on the sativa side because that gives you a little bit of a boost up, and the other one gives you more of a sedative type of feeling. But they work together really, really well to create this therapeutic effect that cannabis provides synergistically. So uses of the terpenes, I kind of mentioned a couple of them already, but terpenes are found in all living plants. So plants produce terpenes as their essential oils. So it's not not only just in cannabis, it's in other substances. So pinene, obviously, pine needles, but rosemary and basil, and it's good for alertness, memory retention. Myrcene, surprisingly, is found in mangoes. They're small rates, lemongrass, thyme, and it's really good for muscle tension, but also as a sedative. Limonene, which is found in peppermint, for instance, and citrus fruits, and that's really, really good for as an antifungal, antibacterial, but also gives you that lift in serotonin and dopamine. Linalool is found in lavender, and it's exactly what it is. It's calming and relaxing. And then beta-caryophyllene, which is an amazing anti-inflammatory, it's also found in black peppers and cloves. So getting back to genetics and why I'm doing this talk, I really want to make this an example that how important and how cannabis can be super personal to an experience. And one of my primary goals is risk mitigation. I believe that when people have a positive experience with cannabis, they will tell other people. And the more people you tell, the more we can mitigate the possible negative experience, the more people will have, the more people will communicate that experience, and we can finally get rid of this stigma associated with this amazing plant. So I want to use this as an example to tell a story. So Grandma Mary. So Mary, I don't know, 50 years ago, happened to eat a brownie at a party in college, and she had an awful experience. THC brownie, obviously. She was having anxiety, even a panic attack, sweats, and she swore off that she puts in the devil's lettuce for years and years and years, and she wouldn't touch it. Unfortunately, Mary got diagnosed with cancer, and she lived in an assisted living facility. And one day she was watching a show with Dr. Sanjay Gupta, who talked about cannabis and its effects on cancer. And, obviously she trusted Sanjay Gupta, who doesn't? And then she happened to go to a dispensary and decided to try this again. And she happened to pick up a chocolate bar, and she told the bartender there that she had experience. So he told her to limit the milligrams that she would consume. So Mary decided to take a smaller piece than the 20 milligrams that was on there, broken in half, consumed it, and had an awful experience. Mary was sick, and she started hallucinating, even as she reports, sweating. And she began to tell everybody in her assisted living facility, do not take this substance. It's bad for you. Now, if Mary would have known that she's a ultra slow metabolizer, and she would have consumed her cannabis and bypassed her digestive system, it would have consumed it through a sublingual method that's under your tongue, or your buccal cavity that's located in your cheeks. She would have bypassed your digestive system, would have missed this slow metabolism effect that goes through your digestive system. Mary would have had a great experience, which now she does when she consumes cannabis, because she knows that she has she's a slow metabolizer. Her enzymes aren't digesting, metabolizing cannabis effectively, and there's a gene associated with that called CYP2C9 as an example. Now, there's also Jack. Jack is a veteran who suffers from PTSD. His physician told him about cannabis, and Jack, being proud, didn't want to tell anybody that he was having a really hard time with cannabis. And he was getting panic attacks, anxiety. Now, there's a couple of genes that can have an association with that. But one of them is COMT, and they call it the warrior gene. So what happens in an effective, a lot of veterans and athletes actually have this. Sometimes you have a genetic expression on the warrior side. So when you have extra serotonin that's being pumped into your bloodstream. You have, which actually also helps to release cortisol. So when you are in a situation, as Jack puts, when bullets are flying at him, he's completely calm. He's doing his business and he knows what he has to do. However, when he's home and the birds are chirping, it's a beautiful day, and he's looking out the window, that anxiety starts. So what happens is he's on the warrior side of the COMT gene, and he has this fight or flight that's triggered that he knows how to control calmly in a situation, but this can be exacerbated by THC and also certain terpene profile, like I was mentioning, limonene. So when Jack found out that he had this genetic profile, Jack was able to find the right ratio of cannabinoids and terpenes that work really well to mitigate the expression of that gene, so Jack can have a really positive experience consuming cannabis, which he actually needs for his PTSD. So one of my favorite quotes, and I truly believe in this, the art of medicine consists of amusing the patient while nature cures the disease. Your body wants to heal. As long as you are able to give your body exactly what a person needs, your body really wants to heal. So how do you do that? How do you help your body know what it actually needs so it can heal itself? Well, first of all, it's really important to know that cannabis is personal, and your genetics really matter in your consumption. So 99.9% of our genes are the same. It's that 0.1% that makes a difference, and it creates that experience that's personalized to you. Now, as I mentioned, cannabis is personal, and there is a way that you can identify what your genetic makeup is and how it relates to your experience with cannabis. And we were able to have our world-renowned research team of scientists. We've developed this ability that looks at your genetic expression and sees how cannabis works with you specifically. So we looked at every single gene that has direct or indirect association with your endocannabinoid system. Once we identified those, we had to come up with a way of how to communicate that, what people consume cannabis for, specifically what symptomatic conditions, and where genes play a role without talking about diagnosis or without talking about specific disease states, because that is what physicians do, and that's regulated by the FDA. So we came up with 8 different symptomatic conditions: anxiety, pain, dependence, cognitive function, sleep, metabolism, depression, and psychosis. So what we do is we look at your genetic expression, your genes, as they're associated with each one of those symptomatic conditions. And we show you the results of how we can reduce and lessen the adverse effects that may express some of these genes, and what is a more optimal ratio of cannabinoids and terpenes that work best with your own expression, with your own bodies. So we have a direct-to-consumer kit. It's called the Endo DNA kit, and it comes in a box like this. It's sent directly to your home. The way that it works, it's pretty simple. It comes in a box with these things inside of it, and it is, I'll explain how to use it in a second. I also want to say that over 40 million people have taken some sort of genetic test, whether it's a 23andMe, it's an Ancestry.com to find out, your history. Well, if you have taken one of these tests, you don't really have to swab, which I'll get into how our kit works. You can just upload your raw data. It belongs to you, and then you can upload that, and we'll translate that information into giving you a cannabinoid profile. Now, we're only as good as the version of the array that one of those companies uses. So the earlier versions of 23andMe had a lot more coverage than the latter versions because they were going for their FDA approval. But it'll give you a really good indication of a cannabinoid profile that is more optimal to you. So how does it work? Well, it's pretty easy. Number one, the kit that I just mentioned, it comes in with a buccal swab. So the swab is basically a big Q-tip. So you take the Q-tip, you swab the inside of your mouth, your cheek, put it back in the box that it came in, register it because it belongs to you, and security is extremely important to us. So the data is fully anonymized, and then you mail it back in the box that it came in, and we will notify you when your results are ready. It takes about 4 weeks to get the lab sequencing done so we can get your results. And it's and what you get when you get your results is the following things. Number one, we give you a suggestive wellness plan. The suggestive wellness plan looks at all those symptomatic conditions and shows you your genetic profile as it is associated with those symptomatic conditions. The second thing that it does is we look briefly at drug-to-drug interaction at a very high level. And as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, how important it is to understand when your cannabinoids interact with different prescription medication that you may be taking. Just being aware of that is really important. We also give you your optimal cannabinoid and terpene profile as a ratio that's more associated with your genetic expression. And finally, a product suggestion match. So the way that we do that is we look at COAs or test results that we get from different labs, and we align it with products that are available within your certain market based on legalities and based on availability of those results. And we will suggest that those products match fairly well with those suggested ratios. And here's where you can get those products. So an example would be if it's in California, then you can pretty much have a dispensary or manufacturer or delivery service possibly get your products almost anywhere. If you're in Canada, it will be a licensed producer. If you're in Florida, it may be one of the vertically integrated, dispensaries that also cultivate. And if you're in New York, for instance, you may have to go to your medical clinic or the physician that actually administers cannabis as medicine. So that's the way it works based on legalities and your zip code location. We also have filed IP on different formulations that also align really well with your genetic expression. And there's manufacturers throughout the country, actually in Canada, that use those formulations, kind of a recipe, and they manufacture products that more align with your genetic expression under their own personal brands. So I just want to kind of disclose that in full transparency. So I really want to talk about privacy and confidentiality. It's really important. So when you get your test results, you log into your secure portal. Now, the secure portal, everything is stored on AWS, Amazon's secure server. Now, your personal information resides on one server. Your DNA is in another server. Everything is fully encrypted. We're HIPAA compliant. And your information is anonymized. So we don't know until it's dynamically built. We don't know if this is Len May's DNA until that report is built dynamically for you. So, and the reason for that is we don't care as much about Len May's data. We care that we have 1,000 samples, 1,000 people that have this genetic marker that specifically works well with this profile and ratio of cannabinoids and terpenes, and that's the feedback loop that we're looking for, not necessarily my own personal information. That's not really our interest. It's to be able to create more personalized plant medicine using cannabis that are associated with your own genetic expression individually. So once you log into your secure server, you'll have a summary of your reports. There's also a survey that's associated with that. And the reason for the survey is we want to know what it is that's most important to you. So if anxiety is really something of an issue to you, that information will be served up as an aggregate of your different genes that have to do with anxiety. And that anxiety may be exacerbated by that response, the stress response that I mentioned before of anandamide that can be triggered by THC and limonene and other things. So just understand that and being able to serve that information up, that's really important. So to address that with the survey information. In addition, we also take it a step further where we provide you information that's specific as an aggregate to your suggested wellness plan and how to dose correctly as well based on your metabolic function. So as we dig deeper, and if you want to dig deeper, it's up to you because we give you a summary. It's really simple, but if you want to geek out on science like me, I want to go deep. I want to understand what's creating fear, what's fear extinction, what is my stress response, what are the traits that have to do with anxiety. So we give you sort of a really simple way to do that and to look at different gauges. And the gauges work this way. When you're in the red, you have an increased risk. When you're in the yellow, you have a moderate risk. When you're in green, then you have a decreased risk, like an example, anxiety after stress. And then you're going to be able to click on each individual section and get deeper into the results of that experience. So we'll show you the exact genes that we actually look for. We'll show you your personal, what's called the phenotype of your own genetic expression. We'll look at your traits, and then after doing that, we will give you a suggestion on what is your formulation as it pertains to that symptomatic condition, anxiety. So if you're looking to address anxiety and this is your optimal formulation, we break it down into what the ratio will be. So we suggest for, as an example, 18:1 to 4:1. And the reason for that is it's based on your personal experience with THC. So if you're a novice, you may want to start with a higher ratio of CBD and THC and then titrate your way down. And we'll show you reference essays, studies, or trials that show you how THC may complicate or exacerbate anxiety. We also give you a primary and secondary terpene profile. So linalool works on reducing anxiety, and we'll give you the studies that are associated with that as well. And I mentioned before the immune response that creates inflammation, and beta-caryophyllene is really good as an anti-inflammatory working in conjunction with your cannabinoids. So who benefits from this test? But before I even jump into that, I want to say one thing that when people, some of the questions that I've had is, well, sometimes you get a contradiction. And I said, yeah, absolutely, because there is no one thing. So people said, that's fine, just give me one single thing that's going to address all my needs. And I want to just preface, cannabis is not a cure-all. It's not a silver bullet. It's an amazing adjunct if you find what's right for you. And it works as a therapeutic agent for many different things. However, an example would be where you have a conflict. Let's say that somebody has some issues sleeping, but based on their genetic profile, it says that they can consume a higher level of THC with a terpene profile that is going to help them, be more sedated and relaxed as they're going to sleep. However, they also saw in their genetic profile that THC can exacerbate anxiety. So what do? There's a dichotomy. There's a conflict. Well, what you do is you're empowered. You have the information to make a decision for the first time in your life on how to consume properly. So what you may want to do is during the day, when you have some environmental factors that can trigger the genetic expression of anxiety, maybe what you want to do is get more equal, titrate up on your CBD, maybe consume something that's more of a one-to-one with a terpene profile that's not going to trigger that genetic expression. So having linalool, having myrcene, having beta-caryophyllene. And at night, when you're in the comfort of your own home, maybe you want to consume something that has a little bit higher THC that may trigger that genetic expression that'll help you sleep better, as long as you keep the terpene profile aligned with your genetic expression to mitigate that anxiety come up, as I mentioned before, linalool, myrcene, etc. So that's the way you would use that, and you have the information to empower yourself. So who benefits from this test? I mean, in my opinion, it's anybody who wants to consume cannabis for any reason whatsoever. So if you're new to cannabis and you really want to try it, this is a baseline. This is your foundation. You start with this and then you move forward. And the way I kind of look at us as, people say, you're the 23andMe of cannabis, etc. I don't feel we're the 23andMe of cannabis because we use that, but I look at us more as your GPS. And what I mean by that is your GPS is your guide. It shows you that this road over here is full of traffic. Yes, construction. This is a road you may want to avoid. This road over here is a much better path, but it doesn't guarantee there won't be some potholes along the way. So what's next for Endocanna Health? Well, what's next is different things that we're looking at, not only your single pathways that I mentioned, but in addition, there's other things that can trigger your genetic expression. So nutrition, what you eat, how you think, how you dose. So these are the next different tests that we're also going to integrate and show you, as I mentioned before, dosing according to your genetic profile, what kind of metabolizer you are. Integrating additional products, getting more exposure internationally. So we're already in the US and Canada. We're already in Australia, in New Zealand, and we're moving to other countries around the world. What's really exciting is we have a partnership with a company called Ward Medical Management in Australia, and we're going to be doing 6 clinical trials. So people will say, well, how do you know it works? How do you know? There's not enough data. There's not enough information. Well, there's over 15,000 articles on cannabis alone on PubMed. But the clinical trials that we're going to be doing under the TGA in Australia, that's going to go a long way for us to be able to say, not only do we know anecdotally, but we can actually reference specific trials. So the first one is going to be on late-stage dementia patients. They'll all be swabbed genetically. They'll all be given a formulation of cannabinoids and terpenes, and we will see if their response is going to be different based on their genetic profile, and that's super, super exciting. So just to kind of say what our goal is to take the guesswork out. So depending on where you live, what your state laws are, you can go to a dispensary, have an intelligent conversation, or you can bypass some of that conversation and just say, do you have X, Y, and Z product available to you? So that's really what our goal is. So what we're focusing on is a way to be able to provide this information also to the physicians that are using this. So working with states, working with physicians that can actually have a conversation with our patient through a secure physician portal. Since it's HIPAA compliant, that's really the goal, to be able to address not only the individual, which that information belongs to you, but having a conversation with your overall treatment plan with your healthcare provider. And that's kind of what our next step goal is, to be able to align this just with an individual and also for your physician. So I want to thank everybody for your time. I know that it's very hard to take time out of your day to learn and educate yourself. You know, my feeling is that this is the most amazing substance that we have just the tip of the iceberg started to look at and see how it can really work for the individual. And just remember, it is a personal experience. There's ways now that you can actually target and know specifically how cannabis can affect you and how cannabis can be personal. So thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Len, for that informative presentation. I would also like to thank LabRoots for making today's educational webcast possible. Before we go, I want to let everyone know that this webcast will be available for on-demand viewing through June of 2019. And as a final reminder, our speaker will follow up with any questions you've submitted via email. That's all for now. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon. Goodbye.